For me, there's no right or wrong way. Try it. See what happens. This is how we develop our own style. I'd like to thank the Process Art Discovery audience for joining me today. We're going to talk about using some Artistico Fabriano paper on a block to explore a little bit of intuitive painting. Well, accomplices, I've got new paper today. I'm going to share this actually this week coming up with a class that I'm teaching at our Society for Learning and Retirement Center here in my community. So I thought today we would have some fun showing you how beautiful this paper is. It's 140 pound, 300 GSM, that's grams per square meter. That's how they measure paper in reams and whatever for the purposes of that part of things, the technical part of things. This is a rough grain, 100% cotton, extra white, and it is nice and bright white. It's on a block, which is nice. The blocks are glued on all sides, and that helps keep things a little flatter. If the paper does tend to buckle because you've got a little bit more water than it wants to handle at the moment, that's just fine. If you leave the painting on the block until it's completely dry, it will flatten right out and it will be just as beautiful and pristine as you need it to be. So when I sit down to paint, I've not always got an idea in mind, but I pretty much have sort of an idea. I've seen something out in our community as I've been out and about, or I've seen a photo of something that is appealing to me, but I always gravitate back to the landscapes. And my landscapes, if you've been noticing any of my previous work, are kind of loose and intuitive. The trees aren't precise, but you know they're trees. The rocks aren't all that detailed, but you know that they're rocks. And one of my favorite things to do is birch trees. And so I do use masking fluid occasionally. In fact, I just got some new fresh stuff the other day because it does tend to dry out. So in a future video, we'll work a little bit with that perhaps. Now I've got that all gummed up here. I'm using the solo masking tape from Michael Solovia's Watercolor online. There'll be a link in the description for you. But this is how I like to mask out my trees. And because the tape, of course, is very straight on both sides, I tend to rip a strip from the middle area. And I'm just going to place that down as my first tree space. We'll do this as quickly as possible so we can get into the painting part. Sometimes this is just like therapy. It's so much fun to create trees and shapes. It's got a bit of a straight edge there. I'm not going to worry about that because I can go in afterwards with any paint and fix that, or I could put this straight edge on the side of that other straight edge and then just kind of shape a tree up there. A lot of the finer points in the branches can be added later on with a fine brush tip as well. And there I think is probably all we're going to do for birch trees today. We'll leave the rest as the landscape. And I think this tree looks a little out of place there. So those will be my basic tree shapes. Again, the solo tape from Michael Solovia's studio. I love the black tape. It does give a nice I don't know, just a nice visual for me. This tape, they say, can be left on your paper for up to 12 days and then be taken off quite easily. Honestly, I've come across pieces that I've set aside and it's been weeks, and if you were to pull your tape off gently and low off away from your work, I've never had an issue with it. So I've just randomly put some tree shapes down. Landscapes typically for me have a bit of a mountain in the background, some nice cloudy things happening, perhaps a bit of a hillside in the background there. Or we could have I'm going to change things up. I'm going to have a mountain coming down with perhaps a bit of a shoreline there and a lower area here, and have the lake go in behind my trees. We'll see how that works out. Before I go any further, I wanted to mention, I found these little guys at our local dollar store, and they're ashtrays. For people who smoke, they're great. For those of us who don't, they work really well in the studio. I love that they've got those little divots. That was actually my inspiration for my water vessels that I got my friend Lowell to make my initial water vessels, and then Lorenz, our video wizard, was kind enough to make another one for me, and it's got the divots so that I can set my brushes into it. I think those are my favorite things in my entire studio. I just love them. But anyway, these are handy, especially if you're just needing a tiny bit of water. Sometimes you just want to dip your brush into the tip, and if you've got a big vessel, sometimes it takes up more water than what you want in your brush. So with these, you can either add gouache, you can add other paint. I use them in my process for creating painting the wood cradles that I mount paintings onto for my acrylic paints. But just a simple spray like that, the water droplets are in there, and then if I want to just get enough water on the tip of my brush, I can just tip it in, and now the water's sitting on the tip of my bristles. So just thought I'd mention that. Tip of the day, check out your dollar store. I sometimes go and with my grandsons, and we wander about, and they're looking at toys, and I'm looking at, how can I use that in my studio? So it's a fun exercise for all of us. All right. This paper is 5 by 7? 7 by 10. I was a little off there. 7 by 10. So that's going to go into probably not a standard mat opening. So you may want to consider something like this going onto a panel board, or getting a custom mat cut. If I was going to mat it, I might want to take some tape and just give it an even white border. But I think I'm not going to worry about that today, because because I'm on this roll with the wood cradle panels, I'm going to paint right to the edge and then trim off anything that the panel doesn't allow for it to sit on. So with our intuitive paintings, I've kind of got an idea, and I was talking with Lorenz about that earlier today, about painting is like cooking. You know, you have the basic recipe, and then you bring in your own ingredients. You figure out what works best for you. Maybe you substitute one ingredient for another. Maybe you prefer parsley over cilantro. You know, it's all personal preference and feeling. When it comes to art, I think the freedom to have fun with that. Try it out. For me, there's no right or wrong way. Try it. See what happens. This is how we develop our own style. If you have nice materials to work with, your results are going to be really satisfying. So let's start with just getting some water on the surface. I love this Fabriano paper, how lovely it accepts that water. It does have, moving that little tree around more than I wanted to there. The grain on it is not as even as some. I painted a picture on some other paper the other day, some 100% cotton paper, and the grain on it was very mechanical looking, and I'm not a fan of that. I'm more the organic kind of look. So for this, because it's a small painting, I'm going to do the water on the entire page, and I'm just going to let it sit for a second. I'm going to wake my paints up. This is my solo palette, Eco palette, Eco Studio palette. So it's got 12 wells, created for Michael Solovyev, who's a watercolor artist out of Eastern Canada. And he teaches all over the world. If you get a chance ever to sit in on one of his live workshops, do yourself a favor, and you'll enjoy every minute of it. Michael paints with often with a larger brush, which you've seen me use here. This is from his studio as well. This is a 6-line solo brush, short handle for travel. There's a longer handle one as well. And I believe there's even a 7-line one available now. And there's a 3-line. They hold tons and tons of water. And because it's lovely to use a big brush, these palettes are wonderful because they can fit in, the brush can fit into each well very nicely. So we're able to access as much of that juicy pigment as we can. I spray my palette really well first. The relationship between water and pigment and your brushes and your paper is something that's, I think, an ongoing process. You'll develop that, and that will evolve, and you'll learn what the combination and the various combinations of those things will do for you as you develop your style. So the paint is waking up, the water is soaking in. This particular paint is called Aussie Red Gold, and it's an interesting one. In the tube, it was a bit dry. These are all Daniel Smith paints, by the way. Really high quality artist, fine artist quality paints in a tube, and I put them into the palette and let them dry. But the Aussie Red Gold tends to want to crack all the time, and I've even added, just to try to plump it up a bit, some gum arabic, which is what the basis of the Daniel Smith paints are. So you can get gum arabic and add it to your paints if they're drying out a little bit. It's a good thing to have on hand. So when I sit back and I look at my paper now, I can see it is buckling a slight bit. That's great. That's fine. It means the water is absorbing. But there's no sheen left on the surface. So where I want to add my sky in particular, I want to have enough water on the surface so that when I add my paint, my pigment, it's going to move around. Typically, my skies are a little darker and moodier than what some artists prefer. Often skies are painted with ultramarine or cobalt blue. I prefer the Mayan dark blue. It just gives me that moodiness and kind of the effect that I like. Once I get my Mayan dark blue on my page, I mean, it's certainly easy enough to go in with another color. And I'll open this palette, which has got some cobalt blue in it, just to show you how that would look if I added a bit of cobalt, just a brighter blue. With my skies, once I've got this part in, it's easy enough to add if I wanted to put in, say for example, just a bit of a sunny horizon. Now remember I said I was going to have the lake, the water part of this scenery going behind the trees, so I'll make a little shoreline going back there. Not halfway, probably about a third of the way up. I tend to work it often with the rule of thirds. Dividing things in half sometimes sort of detracts from your design. So the rule of thirds, if you take your page and you divide it into 3 this way and 3 this way, where the lines intersect are your focal points, basically. So there'll be one here where your eye sort of goes, and then maybe one down here. So this will make this a pretty little area for your eye to focus on. I'm not being really specific. I'm just getting some colors in here because that sky is going to be reflecting in the water. If this indeed is water, then I do want that to be indicated there. Paper towels always at the ready. These have a bit of an imprinted design stamped on them. If you're pressing into your wet area quite firmly with that imprinted design, you'll get that showing up in your page, on your painting. So that's not always optimal. So I try to turn it over, get a flatter surface, and I'm going to go in and I'm just wanting to basically shape some clouds with the edge of my paper towel. And these will be kind of fluffy clouds. We'll make that one a little more rounded. This area here is still fairly damp. The paint is still going to continue to move and soften as the paint dries. So I'm not going to go in there with a brush. If I was to go in with a brush, I would start to create harsh lines, and I just kind of love that bit of softness. Now here, where you can see my brush line where I had that cobalt blue put in, and I'm not thrilled about that, and I can see that it's not going to dissipate much more because the page is starting to dry. Instead of using a brush, which I could do very, very lightly, but I often will just use my paper towel and pull that pigment through. Just the gentlest of touch. And then I can carry those lines across. And I'm pretty happy with those clouds. I think they're kind of fun. They're a little bit wispy. They're a little fluffy. And they're going to be a nice part of that background for me. Things are still a bit damp here. I'm going to, still using my wide solo brush, I'm just going to add just a bit more dampness. You can tilt your page and see where you've got water. And so for my water, I've got some indanthrone blue, and it's a brighter blue than the Mayan dark blue. So I'm just going to go in and see if I can get a little bit of that in to indicate a bit of a shoreline. So if we've got mountains up in this area here, we'll cover a bit of that sunlight up, and then down here further. Now you notice I'm dabbing my brush, taking most of the water out, and then pulling the paint off to the side. Just want to leave some of that pigment there, but I don't want it to be harsh. Here is not bad because I'm going to build up some mountains on this side. And probably, I think there was going to be our horizon, so that's fine. Keep things a little bit uneven. So if this is the base of my mountain on this side, I'm going to cut that back there. I can make a little bit of a line with my brush by just pulling the pigment away. So I'm shaping my design now. I'm not adding more paint. I'm creating elements intuitively. I'm letting the paints show me where I can throw things in terms of mountains, shorelines. Now under my trees, I'm going to want to have a bit more color. And we can bring that through, I'm going to go back to my Mayan dark blue just because I want some depth underneath my trees. I want a bit of shadow. Okay. I'm also going to create a bit of sort of like the tops of trees, just with the edge of my brush. It's a bit rough. It's not, you know, just sort of giving some indication there might be some treetops happening back there. Like I say, we're not needing to be really specific at this point in time. Okay. I'm going to clean my brush. Wipe most of the moisture off. And just again go in, making sure that I've got a bit of a basis there for my lake going in behind my trees. Okay. This is still a bit damp. I'm going to switch brushes now. I'm going to go to my Lebenson medium goat hair 1.5 inch bristle. You can see the point on that is deadly. I love it. It's just beautiful to be able to lay your paints, your colors in, and you can start creating trees more in the foreground by just using a fairly rich mixture of paint on your brush. And you'll notice that I don't dig around in my paints much because I keep them quite wet, because the paints, like I say, are mixed with formulated with gum arabic. They're juicy. They're going to stay juicy. I don't have to destroy my brushes by digging. I see so often where people are working and working and working at getting the paint out of their palette, and I just feel that that's not doing my brushes any favor. So I'm just randomly going to throw a couple of trees in here. They're in the background. They don't have to be specific. They can be pretty loose. I like how the way the water has kind of lifted the pigment in this area here looks kind of misty. And I think that's kind of fun. It'll be like mist coming off a lake. So I don't really want to bring my trees into there. This mountain, the way I've created this here, this shoreline, this piece looks more forward, so this will be back. So these trees can be even less detailed. But I do want to create a couple very varying heights, just to give it a bit of variety. Like I've said before, nature is perfectly imperfect, and you do see patterns, of course. I mean, nothing more beautiful than the patterns on a butterfly or a dragonfly or a hummingbird or something that way, or plants when you look up closely. But from a distance, it's that randomness is kind of fun. So I love that mist that's happening there. There's a little bit happening here, and I might even be able to, this brush is just damp. It's just leaving a tiny bit of moisture on my hand, and I'm just going to go in, see if I can't create a bit of that mist happening in this area, because I really do like that. I'm going to pull that down a bit. There we go. And pull that up. As I've said before too, it's often what you take away, not what you put on, that creates your painting. So we've got some blue here. I love to add greens and yellows and different things. This one's looking very wintry at the moment. A bit of a cool yellow to show, I don't know, sunset or a sunrise. I'm not sure. I think there is one that typically is more yellow, one is more pink than the other, but I'm not sure what that is at the moment. But I'm going to look into some sap green. I like to lay my bushes and my foundation pretty loosely. These wet dabs of paint are going to dissipate shortly, but they're still going to give you the indication that there are some shrubs and different things happening. And by using the paint fairly rich and thick on my brush and dabbing with a wide brush randomly, you can see where there are darker areas, and especially where the Mayan dark blue was sitting in the background. And it got not completely dry. It was still fairly dampish when I added the green in. And now I'm going to go in with, again, just a barely damp brush. And I'm going to close this because I don't want those other colors at the moment. I'll get rid of that. And I'm going to go in with a freshly wetted quinacridone gold. And again, this is the quinacridone gold. If you can see this, it pushes the other colors away. It brightens things up. It has basically a little life of its own when you add it to your paper. And so all those dark colors that I've put on there provide a background, a bit of shading, a bit of shadow. But when I get my quinacridone gold on top and it's pushed things away, it automatically creates these little bush and shrubbery shapes. And that is really, to me, amazing. Okay, so if the colors that you've put are a bit intense, when they're still wet like that, you can go in and just randomly, lightly dab. And again, you're creating more spots of light, which intensify your shadows, which make things more three-dimensional. And we have a painting that's basically created itself. It's an intuitive exercise. We haven't done a lot of pre-thought to how things wanted to play out. A little bit at the beginning just to sort of get a basis for where we're going. But if you allow the paints and the water to do what they want to do on this surface, and this Fabriano paper is delightful. I'm enjoying this thoroughly. I'm just going to put a little evergreen tree in the bottom here. I kind of had a little splotch of paint there that looked like it could morph into a tree, and there we have it. You can add even more of those dark lines. One thing to remember also is keep your paints juicy and ready at all times. Now what I've done is I've sprayed the top part of my painting, and I didn't want water droplets on there. Because this portion of the painting it's not completely dry, but it's dry enough that if a drop of water was to land on the surface, because there's a different level of wetness, wherever that drop of water has landed, it's going to push away and it's going to cause a little cauliflower, a little bloom. So Lorenz and I were talking earlier about how I liken this almost to driving as well. So you've got to be paying attention. What's happening up there? Is something going to come along and broadside you when you're not expecting it? I've had that happen before. I've been so focused on something in a painting and think, oh my gosh, this is almost ready to go, and then sat back and looked at it, and there's a big cauliflower or bloom happening that I wasn't really planning on. So we have all kinds of things happening in this painting. I'm going to take the tape off now, just because once it's off and I get my trees forming, then I can go in afterwards and decide how much more detail I want to put in my design. So I'm just, and that might mean, you know, adding a couple more of these cute little, after seeing I'm going to leave it, I'm not going to, I'm going to put another little, because I just felt like that little evergreen needed a little buddy in there, so we've added him. Let the paints direct you, you know. When I first sat down to do this, I wasn't thinking about maybe doing a misty lakeshore possibly, but the mists showed up, and I love that. I love that that's happening. So it's kind of wintry in the background. This is a little more warm fallish because I've got those gold colors in there, but I can change that as well, and I can go in with one of these. It's got a little edge on it. Hang on a second here. There we go. That's what we want. So this came off of a bag of avocados, and I've taken my my X-Acto knife, and there was little nubs on this end. I just slid those off, and then I took a sanding block and worked away at an angle so that I could create a bit of a finer edge on that rather than having a chunky square. Now this is still damp, but not damp enough. And I'm going to switch to just a smaller brush for a moment. And I'm thinking, yeah, we probably need a bit more blue because there's a lot of blue in that background there. So I'm just going to add some of that blue, a little bit of wetness. I'm going to let that sit for a few moments, just so that the paper can absorb and attach to some of that color. And then I am going to go in with my bread tab, and I'm going to create some rock shapes. And these are so fun to do. Keep them random if you can. And now we have a bit of rocky shapes in our foreground. And we can have things growing out of them if we choose. Those kind of details can come later. I think I'm going to leave that gold. I kind of like that gold, even though there's a bit of, you know, colder effect in the background. But I can always go in afterwards if I decide I want to bring a bit of the gold and just bring a couple of highlights into that area, just to pick that up. But for now, I'm going to very gently, because the paper is still damp, I am going to very carefully and gently pull away my tree shapes. Always with your tape on your paper, keep it as low as you can to the paper and pull gently off to the side. Very slowly and gently. If you're using really nice quality paper, 100% cotton paper, you will have no issues with this. It comes off nicely, it releases well. If you're using a cellulose paper, not so much. Okay. Now we can go in and have some fun with our birch trees. Again, with the bread tab or the bag enclosure tab, you could use a credit card. You could cut it up into little pieces and let, you know, work with that. The risk with that is that if you cut your credit card, you're going to actually have some very sharp edges. So be conscious of that. You might want to round those off a little bit because those sharp edges can scratch your paper. Your paper is, it's pretty tough, but it's also pretty delicate. So if you're going in with something with a sharp edge, you can scratch that paper. And if you do that, it will make a mark. The pigment will settle into that scratch, and you won't get that off. It can be to your advantage. But again, I would only not use something with a really sharp pointed edge. I would use like a rounded corner like that, and you can create shapes with the edge of that as well for your undergrowth and your shrubbery and that kind of thing. Okay, so this is, I think we've determined it's kind of a wintry scene. So my trees are going to be pretty cool and stark looking, I think. Often I like to use a paint called Moon Glow, and someone has reminded me that it's considered a fugitive color. And that means it is not light fast, and over the years it can fade if it's in sunlight. I haven't had that issue yet with the Moon Glow because I've used it often, but it is something to consider if that's a concern for you. You can use a paint called Lunar Violet, and then add a bit more purple in if that's something you want to do. So I'm just going on the edge, and I'm doing this backwards. I should have started at this side and moved this way because I don't want to put my hand in those paints, but we work with it when things aren't exactly the way we had planned. And this part should come fairly quickly. We can just get those little trees in there. And I will go on this side and just kind of random. I don't want it to look like it's got bands and things that are symmetrical all the way up. So I'm just going to kind of just move them here and there. Sometimes I like to add in the area where there's a little crook in the branch. You can add a bit more darkness. It's nice to have a bit more pigment at the bottom of your trees. And like I say, it's like driving. You got to watch. You don't put your hand in your in the way. You don't want things showing up. All right. So for me, I think that's just about enough of the Mayan or the Moon Glow. Clean that down. One thing that that you might notice is that some colors are much more staining than others, and I find that with the yellows. As much as I love my quinacridone gold, that stuff gets on everything. So you've got to be really aware of that, and it doesn't often come away as much as we need it to if it gets in the wrong place. So, like I say, it's like driving. You've got to keep an eye on all kinds of things as you go along. I just want to get a fine brush and quickly finish these trees off. They're a small tree, so I'm going to use, this is a chisel brush, chisel blender it's called. The bristles are fairly stiff, so they're going to keep that fine edge, which is what I want for touching the edge of my trees and bringing that color across. Oops. We've got the Mayan, or the Moon Glow. I keep wanting to say Mayan Dark Blue. I'm not going to do a lot of Mayan, but I want to touch especially in the base of the tree and lower. I just like to have a darker, and I'm going to blend in my a little bit of the gold just to pick up on the sunlight coming through. from the background. I mean, I could always use an Aussie red gold as well, which is, I'll show you here, it's quite beautiful, but very orange, and probably not what I really want to have in this design. So if I feather that out and just, now that I've got a bit on there, I'm going to go and just bring that, just for some consistency, into the other parts of the tree. Make them a little bit, there. I wet my brush and go back over that area, diluting that pigment, pulling it out into the tree with a bit of a rounded motion. I don't want them to be too pronounced, but I do want the indication that that tree has some roundness to it. So by just curving my brush ever so slightly, I can give that effect. The Aussie red gold plays really well with the moon glow, with the Mayan dark blue. It's a pretty strong color. And I think probably what I will do is bring some of this moon glow up into it, and it turns it more of a gray when they're blended together, just so that it's not quite as stark. And here again, it's that recipe, you know, a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and you know, you might come up with a combination that helps to bring your signature style. Trusty paper towel in my hand. This has got a fair bit of color. I can take some of that out just by wetting my brush and doing a little bit of scrubbing, and it just kind of adds to that texture. Now with a slightly damp brush and a paper towel, I'm going to pull a little bit of that moon glow across. And like I say, nature is perfectly imperfect, so your trees are your trees. You can blend and pull these colors. And because we're using beautifully pigmented, rich paints, you can do these things, and it's almost like magic how they come together. I love that the moon glow especially is able to give you that kind of patchiness. You know how birch trees have that kind of irregular, patchy look to their bark, especially as it's peeling off in places. And you can lift and pull, and I'm just going to put a tiny bit of quinacridone gold. It's a softer bit of color in there. And if we think about what we talked about earlier is the rule of thirds. So this is going to be one where your eye is drawn. This is one area. That's 1/3. Another one will be sort of up here. So we could add something else there if we wanted to. We could put a bird or a boat or anything there if we wanted to. I prefer to leave most things just to the imagination. I'm happy that this little area here will be sort of my focal point. It's got a little, you know, some little trees that are kind of getting your eye that way. And we'll just feather a bit more here and there. I mean, this is the part where, you know, you could do this forever. The fiddling and the blending and working things through. My brush, if you noticed, I hardly ever have touched the water. Just barely damp, that's all you need. And work gently, feather these colors. Bring these together. Leave some white spaces. Your white spaces are what add the brilliance to your page, right? And if you want to, sometimes I'll just take color from the painting and add it, because I don't want a whole lot. Okay. Now that was kind of weird how that happened up there. I'm just going to take that out because I didn't like it. There we go. So you have an intuitive landscape. From now on, it's up to you to decide how much more finishing you want to do. You can go in with a, you know, a hockey brush and add some leaves. I'm happy to leave this sort of more wintry. So that's, you know, that's kind of where that's going to be. I like that the shoreline is back here, comes out this way. I can define that a tiny bit more with, again, just the dampest, very little wetness on the brush, just so I can go in and shape a little bit, pull out some colors. You could add more trees, more shrubbery, but I'm happy with that. I think that's a nice little study of watercolor, quickly done, intuitively done, on some lovely Fabriano Aquarello, yes, Artistico extra white, 100% cotton, rough grain paper on a block. I'd like to thank the Process Art Discovery audience for joining me today. We explored some intuitive watercolor painting on some Fabriano Aquarello paper and just had some fun letting the water and the pigments do what they do. If you'd like to see more, subscribe to the channel or hop over to the members area, see what's happening over there.